my name is Peter, and I started beekeeping in 1974. I was just 20-something, and I was looking for, I really didn't have any idea what I was going to do as a full-time job. And I read about beekeeping, and I thought, yeah, that's the kind of thing that, it's a little bit different than what everybody else is doing. It kind of connects you with nature. It's during the 70s, everybody was back to nature, live on a farm and do all those things. So I went to work for a beekeeper here in Wayne County, and this guy had 2,400 hives, no permanent help, zero. I mean, he hired everybody new every spring because no one would come back. Once they found out what beekeeping with him was like, no one wanted to come back and do that again. And so what he would do was he would hand you a bee veil, a hive tool, a bee smoker, and the keys to one of his trucks, and you were a beekeeper. And if you didn't know it, you would learn it fast because we were pushed right out. It was the same month, April. We were pushed right out in the field and told to start unwrapping the hives. So they had them wrapped in black paper, And the first thing you do is you unwrap the hives, and the bees haven't seen anybody for 6 months, and all they want to do is sting you. So I got stung at first, at least 100 sometimes a day. So my arms were just covered in the armpits, of course, because you get sweaty and they go for the armpits. And I was just newlywed. We'd only been married for, oh God, just a short time. And I was just covered with sting. I looked like, like Hercules. My arms were so fat. And my wife says, how can you do this? This can't go on. And I said, well, I'm going to tough it out. And so after a couple of weeks, the swelling went away, and I was a beekeeper. That's it. I was inoculated, and it still hurts. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it still hurts today. That never goes away. But the swelling and the itching and all of that annoyance, that went away. So after that, she didn't really like upstate New York. She had moved to California to get away from the East, and I mean, so had I. But I had this idea that beekeeping in upstate New York, that's where it started, and that's what I'll talk about a little bit in my talk. A little bit about the history of beekeeping in New York, and then we'll get into the beekeeping of spring today, now. So I like this picture. This kind of takes us back to England. I mean, the beekeeping came from England, Germany, Holland. When the people came across on the sailing ships, they brought hives. And I just read recently is what they did is they put them in barrels and they put them way down in the hold. I always had this idea that when they brought the bees over on the Mayflower, they were on the deck bothering everybody. But it's according to what I just read just the other day, they put them in the hold in the darkest, coldest place. I mean, they're underwater. I mean, they're what 50 or 100 feet below sea level down there in the hold. And they have their pickles and whatever else they're trying to keep cold is down in the bottom. And that's where they were supposed to try to survive. So if they put them in there in the fall, they just think it's wintertime. By the time they get to the New World, they think it's spring. And that's how they got bees over here. And as you may or may not know, these are skep hives. They're called skeps. And the way they were made was by making braids out of cane, and then they coil it up like that, and you've got a basket. And the thing that's great about a skep hive is it's a hive and a swarm catcher at the same time. So when a swarm is hanging on a branch, if you're lucky, your swarm is like this far off the ground and right there, so you just come up with your skep hive and shake the branch and thump, in they go. If you're not so lucky, they might be on the ground, or they might be up 50 feet, and you will have to go up to a ladder. But the process is the same. And if this skep hive has been used before, it's going to have that smell of bees. Bees, coat everything with tree sap and give it that bee smell. And so if you thump them into that thing and turn it upside down or right side up, depending upon your point of view, they think, wow, this must be where we were headed. Otherwise, why would we be here, right? So that's as much as they can think. And 99 times out of 100, and believe me, there are cases when they just go, hey, wait a minute, this is not where we were going. And they just go somewhere else. But anyway, so this is how it was done in those days. Here's your skep hive, and usually they covered them with a cap of straw to protect it from the elements, because a cane is going to be susceptible to dampness and mildew. And And a lot of countries, I'm not exactly sure which, they would cover it with mud. So this was taken probably within the past 2 years, because this is a still from a video or a movie that's just come out. It's about this traditional beekeeper, and I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it's what's the country? Macedonia, maybe? You know, Greece, Macedonia, one of those countries right in there. Yeah, and the movie is about her being impacted by modern beekeepers coming into her region, and she feels like, you know, she does it the traditional way, and they do it the modern way, and it impacts on her in various ways. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So, even before the settlers came to the United States, they had switched from using basket hives to various types of boxes. So the advantage for using a box is the skill level is a lot lower. You know, to make those basket hives, those skeps, required the skill of a basket maker, and that's a skill that not very many people had. And so in the New World, and at the same time in England and Germany, et cetera, they started making the hives out of boxes, which essentially the bees don't care whether they're in a basket or a box. You know, they don't really have any idea what you're doing to them. If they knew, they wouldn't stay. So this is like a cabinet hive, and you can see how the combs are in there, and they've got separate compartments. And on the very top, if you look closely, you can see a bell jar. And they got the bees working up in the bell jar, which is a neat trick, because you get that bell jar off there and you get the bees out of it, and you got something to sell that's beautiful. And it's a novelty. But this was not the typical package. The typical package was the box. They would get the bees to fill the box with honey. And people, if they were in the market for honey, they didn't want, like a 12 ounces. They wanted pounds. They wanted a big box full. And so that was what box beekeeping was all about. Eventually, in the beginning, it was more like skep beekeeping, where everything was inside of one container. And what they would do would be they would turn it upside down and cut the combs out with a broad knife and steal the honey from them in their same container. But as they got a little bit smarter about beekeeping, they learned how to add something on top. So in the case of a box hive, you could add another box on top, and the bees would go up in the second box and mostly put their honey, especially if they were used to using the first box as their hive. They got the queen, the brood, everything like that. You put the second box on, and you use very small holes. They'll move up into it and use it as a honey storage box. Or in the case of the skep hive, they would add another basket on top of that, and that was called an eek. So the term eke out something, people don't know where that came from or what it really means. What it means is to extend. People think, if you're eking out a living, it means you're just barely getting by. Eking means getting a little more than what you had. So it could also mean that you're barely getting by, but that's not what it meant in the beginning. What it meant was you're getting a little bit more than what you would have gotten if you hadn't done that thing, which was to put this eke on top. So that's where that comes. And so we call that the super, and it's basically the same idea. The word super means superimposed. It's just short for, I superimposed this box, and then we'll just call it a super, And a lot of the commercial beekeepers just call everything boxes. Put a box on that hive. Take that box and put it on the truck. It's all boxes to them. In fact, they have this nickname. The small timers call them box handlers, because to them everything is a box. It's a box of bees, it's a box of honey, it's an empty box. So anyway, that's a little bit about the beginning. So this was taken in the early United States when they first started having cameras. So when they first started having cameras, we're already well into the 1800s, right? I think photography didn't really catch on until 1860s. There's tons of pictures of the Civil War. So this could have been taken in 1860s or later, or it could have even been taken in the early part of the 1900s, because in a lot of regions like the Carolinas and Smoky Mountains, stuff like that, West Virginia, these log hives, it took them a long time to let go of that old tradition. Just the same as in Germany and Holland today, you can go and see large-scale beekeepers using skep hives, with the baskets, and they're very proud of that as a tradition. And these guys they weren't proud of it as a tradition. They were just cheap. That's all. You know, it cost them almost nothing to cut a log. Yeah, hollow logs are all. I got 4 acres. I got enough hollow logs to supply the whole county. You know. But here's the funny part. I was just thinking about this the other day. I've got 4.5 acres full of hollow trees. I have never seen a swarm move into any of those trees. So that's kind of been a real nutcracker for me. So, but gradually you can see they moved from the hollow log to the box hive. And this was the early part of, or late 1800s, early 1900s. And a lot of times the way they got this log hive was they found a tree in the woods that had bees in it already, and they would cut the tree down, then cut that section out and haul that thing home. So this type of beekeeping, we have a term for it. It's called know-nothing beekeeping, or else the other term for it is bee-haver. Rather than a beekeeper, these people don't keep bees, they just have bees. And they try to know as little as possible, and you know, I don't subscribe to that. So this, you know, when what we call the frame hive, what everybody in this room is using now, the hive with the frames in it, that was invented in its form that's present today in the 1850s. There were some frame hives used prior to that, but they weren't very practical. There'd be like, they'd have frames, but you couldn't get them out. Or in Germany, they had frames, but they came out this way instead of out the top. They came out this way, out like a book off of a bookshelf, so you could pull them out. And then they even had some that came out this way, which meant if you wanted to look at that one in the back, you had to take all the other ones out of the front. So the ones that were like a bookshelf, that was a little more practical. So you could pull out this frame or this frame, and you see whatever it is you're looking for. So in this case, this guy's purchased what they called a bot hive or a patent hive. He's purchased this, and he's cutting the combs out of his old box, and he's going to mount them in frames. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but people are still doing this today. They'll do what's called a cutout, where somebody will say, oh, I got bees in my wall, or there are bees in the chimney, or bees in the steeple, and they'll take the panels off either on the outside or the inside and cut the combs out and mount them into the regular standard frame. And the only thing that's really changed over the years is back in the day they would use twine, and I've upgraded to rubber bands. So rubber bands are quicker and easier to use, and then once the comb is fastened in by the bees, the rubber bands usually break, or they chew them, and then they're gone, and the comb is pretty much good to go. Although there'll never be a perfect comb, don't get me wrong, you know. I don't do that kind of work. I did it a few times and decided that it wasn't worth love or money. It just was not fun for me. So that's why typically a beekeeper that will do cutouts, they'll charge anywhere from $300 to $3,000. You know, I don't condone that, but believe me, it's worth. I mean, it's a lot of work. And if you have, you know, if you find somebody that'll do for free, I would not let them on your property, because obviously they don't know what they're doing, because no one would do that for free. About half the time, the bees are, by the time you get them out of there, they're so bedraggled, they're not worth very much. So it's pretty much, you know, a loss in terms of the bees, unless you're looking for, unless you're collecting, you know, like you're collecting local bees or something like that. And you know, there's still a lot of people that are interested in getting them for that reason alone. The idea that they're not, you know, bees from the south, they're not store-bought bees, they're wild bees. So this is, you know, this picture is taken from Langstraugh's book, which was published in 1853. Now, the hive that he used was a lot fussier than this, but he did acknowledge the fact that people are going to want a simple hive, something that's cheap, so that everyone can use it, you know, without all the kind of fussy furnishings and, you know, lathe work and scroll work and all that stuff. So this is your standard frame, the same way as it is today. And this is the standard box. It was filled with 10 frames. The dimensions are the same. This dimension here, from here to here, is like, what, 19 7/8? People go, what the? 19 7/8? Why would you use a dimension like that, right? So that was another thing that I puzzled over for years and years. And I finally found out. The reason why was he made them out of wine bottle crates. And they came in, they were usually half a meter long. So 500 millimeters is very close to that So there's a little bit of difference in terms of how thick the wood is. So it ended up at this dimension here. And a lot of times the bee manufacturers will fudge a little bit, make it 20, and you don't notice that much difference. So then once they had this, once your beginning beekeepers had this frame, you know, that were able to mount your combs in the frame, and this is before they invented the wax sheets or later plastic sheets. You got the bees to build comb in these frames, and it was a little bit of a pain because when you hold the frame this way, you're home free, but if you turn it this way, the comb would just flop out. So that's when they decided they needed to go step it up, and they invented comb foundation. There's wax imprinted with the pattern of the honeycomb that we want the bees to put in the comb. We want like nice regular rows, you know, this many across and this many down, which they will do sometimes, but they're great improvisers, and sometimes the comb will be wavy, sometimes it'll be in the wrong direction, sometimes it will have cell sizes of a lot of different sizes, which it doesn't hurt anything, but anyway, so then they came up with the idea of putting wires in the frames to support the comb so that you could hold it sideways like this and read it like the pages of a book. And also when you put the thing in a honey extractor, if it's not supported by wires, or if it's not some tough old comb that's been in the hive for 15 years, it would just blow apart in the honey extractor, and you're back to square one. But we can talk about that a little bit more when we get into honey extracting. This gentleman here, every time I mention this guy, my wife cracks up. She goes, "Are you going to talk about Moses Quinby again? Moses Quinby. Oh my God." he's like my hero. He pardon me. He had hundreds and hundreds of hives of the square wooden box plan. So this was a huge going concern before the frame was invented. See, people don't know this. Most beekeepers don't know this. They thought either you went from knowing nothing about bees to getting the frame hive and then knowing everything. But that wasn't true. Back in the early part of the 1800s, there was a lot of large-scale beekeepers in the United States and probably in Europe. I haven't done as much research into Europe, but in New York City, it was expanding, and the market was expanding. It was turning into one of the biggest cities in the world. And they started, the people that were interested in farming and agriculture started moving up the Hudson. So Quinby was born up the Hudson, I think about halfway to Albany. And he found out through the magazines, there were magazines published in the early part of the 1800s. These things came out once a week, and they were all about different types of agriculture pursuits, chickens, you know, dairy, and bees. And so they started talking about how to get the most out of your hives, how to build them, how to manage them, and where to put them. And Quinby realized pretty early on that he was not in the epicenter of beekeeping territory. Where that was up the Mohawk, between Albany. I think I have a map of it. Well, I'll get to it. The map between Albany and Buffalo, the Mohawk. Well, I don't know how far the Mohawk goes, but it goes about to Utica, at least, and that was all cut down. They cut down the wood because the Industrial Revolution required fuel, and they didn't have coal yet. They definitely didn't have petroleum yet. They cut down most of the wood in the upstate region and burnt it in steam engines. They were trying to get away from water power. Prior to steam engines, you had to be by a river, falls, in order to have power. So if you wanted to cut, you know, if you wanted to have a sawmill, if you wanted to have a wheat mill, if you wanted to have, you wanted to do textiles, you had to be positioned by a body of water where you could trap the water and have a water wheel and get power. So when the steam engine was invented, you could be anywhere as long as there was trees. And you would cut the trees and burn them up. Pretty soon they did burn them up. And so that whole area was planted clover, the white Dutch clover, the one everybody sees in the lawn, you know, little white heads with the four-leaf clovers, if you believe in four-leaf clovers, and buckwheat. So the clover was planted primarily to fuel the expanding dairy industry, and the buckwheat was planted because it's one of the few crops that you can grow in upstate New York where you can put it in towards the end of June, because like if it's a wet spring, you're not going to get the plow through the mud until the end of June. You can get this thing in by the end of June and get it harvested before September, because they used to get frosts in September, And so it's like, takes 2 months from planting to harvest. It's a great crop, and they would sell it downstate to all these millions of people that were coming from areas where they ate buckwheat. The Ukraine, Poland, what was called Ukraine, Poland, Galicia, these countries, that's where my wife's from, is that region. And we always joke about the borders. They were just changing all the time. Now you're in Russia, now you're in Poland, you didn't even move. So they were the consumers of buckwheat. And lucky for the beekeepers, this is one of the best honey plants in the world. There were beekeepers in the buckwheat region near Albany that had as many as 500 to 700 hives at home on their property. I'm not talking about 10 miles down the road, 20 miles down the road, another one, all of them on their property. And these people were making unheard of quantities of honey from the clover in the summer and buckwheat towards the end of August. And it was being stored in these boxes. So that you'd go to market and you would sell somebody 10, 15 pounds of honey in one fell swoop, you know. It's a gallon, it's about like a gallon or 2 gallon container. And that was how it was done. But Quinby is not remembered for that. And I mentioned earlier that he was a box hive beekeeper. And when the frame came out, he saw right away, hey, this is the way to go. And they cut all the combs out of all those box hives and put them into modern hives, the same kind of hive that you and I have today. And just switched over, it's like we're going from horses to cars. Let's just do it, let's get on with it. And there were several other beekeepers in that region that did the same thing. There was a Captain Hetherington in the Cherry Valley area, and it caught on. But the thing is, nobody remembers Quinby except for what he did with the bee smoker. This is the Quinby smoker. And before we had smokers, what they would do is they take a metal pie pan like that, and they put pieces of puffball in there and get them burning, dry puffball, and it would smolder. It's like punk. It just stays smoldering, and they would blow the smoke across the punk onto the hives, and that's how they smoked the bees. I mean, can you imagine that? You got one hand full with a pie pan, and the other hand to do all the other work, whatever it is, So if you're lucky, you could have somebody just stand there and blow smoke onto the bees while you're working. So, of course, a lot of them probably didn't do that at all. They just went ahead and worked and got stung. But so he hit upon the idea that if you had a smoker that you could hold and that you can control, and that you could sit down, so you free up your hand, this is something everybody would want. And this is basically the Quinby smoker, which is, the principle is the same as what we have today. A firebox, a funnel, and a bellows. So the firebox got bigger, and the funnel got shorter, and the bellows, they flipped it the other direction. But it's still the same thing. And here's a picture of a guy actually using a very similar one. This is already starting to get a little bit bigger firebox. I can't really see the bellows to see which way it's going. But see, if you light your smoke correctly, and this is a big bone of contention for a lot of beginning beekeepers, is they don't know how to light the smoke correctly, so it keeps going out. But if you light it correctly, it will burn for days. In fact, when I worked at the Dyce lab, we built a metal cabinet because we would put the smokers in the cabinet and at the end of the day, and they'd still be burning the next morning. So that's partly knowing how to do it and partly using the correct fuel. Pardon me. So the correct fuel to have it burn for a long time is wood pellets, but you can't light wood pellets. You have to get the smoker started. We collected a lot of pine needles. You get the smoker started and going good with pine needles, and then you take a handful of wood pellets, hardwood, oak pellets, put that in there, and that will burn. That will literally burn for days. And sometimes we put a little handful of grass on top of the pellets. So you got pine needles in the bottom, pellets in the middle, and a handful of green grass on the top, which acts as a filter. So it cools the smoke, and you're not shooting fire out of the end of it. But anyway, that's, to make a long story short, that's what was wanted, was a smoker that you could set down, that it didn't go out. So if you needed it, you'd pull it out, and you can give a little puff, or a lot of puffs, a lot of smoke if you need it. Like if you've made a mistake, like you've dropped something, and the hive is in an uproar, you got to have a lot of smoke right now. You don't want just a puff or two. So that's why that was the brilliance of that invention. So this was one of the next inventions that came along was the honey extractor. How many people have honey extractors? So you know what I'm talking about, and probably the rest of you know what they are, right? So they hit upon the idea of spinning, and the honey is flung out by centrifugal force. I don't know why it took them so long to figure it out, but it was one of those light bulb moments. The light bulb went off in the guy's head, and he goes, if I go like this inside of a container, the honey's going to fling out into the container. So this is essentially a container. The whole container spins. This is a little crazy, you know. You put your frames in there, start cranking that thing, and the whole bucket is spinning like that. But so, you know, I mean, we've upgraded it to where the basket spins inside the bucket, and the bucket stays still. In fact, with all that motion, a lot of people will bolt the bucket to the floor, especially if you go to the next level, get a motor on there. You're going to want to have that thing bolted to the floor, or at least onto a hardwood pallet, because otherwise it's going to try to move around like like an unbalanced washing machine. So, how much time do we have? All afternoon? Yeah. So, Pat asked me to include a little bit about the history. I just did a presentation at Broome County on was a Tuesday night. And I spent the whole time talking about the history. And people came up to me and they go, I bet you got a lot more where that came from. You don't have any idea. Because this is just upstate New York. You know, there's all the other New England states and Ohio, and then going out California. I could probably do 2 or 3 hours on the whole history of beekeeping in California, but don't get me started. Anyway, so this is a picture that was taken in the late 1800s in my area. I live in Ithaca, but this was taken in Groton, New York. And at the time, this family, the Coggeshall family, 2 brothers and their family and their neighbors, they put together the biggest beekeeping operation in the world at the time. And it was white clover and buckwheat. And the interesting thing is they're right on the lower limit of those crops. You get anywhere south of Groton, and the soil changes, and it's not good for clover. Clover requires what they call a sweet soil. You get into the cut-over acid soil regions like where I live, clover doesn't do well. It'll grow, but it won't produce honey. So see, a lot of people think if you've got a honey plant and you've got a lot of it, you can't go wrong. But with a lot of these honey plants, they're very finicky, and clover is one of those ones that requires a certain type of soil, certain type of weather, or you're going to get nothing. And goldenrod is exactly the same, only the opposite. It wants the acid soil. So I've talked to people in the western part of the state, around Buffalo in that area. They got clover everywhere. They never get any honey from it. They get pollen, and every year somebody will say to me, oh, the goldenrod's in bloom now. We're going to get honey. And it's August. And I say, no, you're not going to get honey in August. Goldenrod doesn't put honey in August. Goldenrod produces pollen in August, produce pollen all the way till the frost. But the honey doesn't start until you start getting some cold nights. So it's almost the opposite of the maple syrup. You know, your maple syrup doesn't start to flow until you get some warm days. Goldenrod doesn't start to flow really until you get some cold nights. And I think probably the plant is thinking, uh-oh, you know, winter's coming. We better get on with it because, me too. So the reason, I have to throw the birds and the bees in at one point, right? The reason why these plants are flowering and producing honey is to get the bees to pollinate. And so there's 2 kinds of plants in the world that get pollinated. There's your wind-pollinated plants. They don't need bees, okay? And we all know what they are. They're the trees, the ones that give everybody hay fever in the springtime. Your maples, your ashes, your willows, your birch. Those are the ones that cause sneezing fits in the spring. And the reason why they do is because they bloom before the leaves come so that the pollen can just go all over the county. You know, if they waited till after the leaves were on, then the pollen would end up on the leaves, and what good is that? So their principle is make so much pollen that some of it's probably going to end up where it's supposed to go. The other half of the plant kingdom that pollinates is the insect-pollinated plants. And that pollen does not blow very much. It's sticky. And they produce it in much, much smaller quantities. So it saves a lot of money for them because they're only producing one jillionth as much pollen, but it's sticky. And so therefore, it's not going to go anywhere until some bee or hummingbird or pollinating weasel or whatever happens on it takes that pollen, it sticks to their body, and they move it to another flower. So this is what goldenrod is up to. They're attracting the bees with this nectar. The bees are coming for the nectar. They don't know that they're doing the job of pollinating. So it's a neat trick. This is a picture, I was going to mention, Vern Morton was a photographer in Groton in the 1800s. And if it hadn't been for Vern Morton taking all these pictures, we wouldn't have these great pictures of what beekeeping was like in the 1800s. And he didn't just take pictures of that. He was taking the pictures of all the aspects of rural life in Groton, upstate New York. And he documented this for us. And he was using a large format camera. I mean, you can't even imagine it now in the days where the camera chip is smaller than your pinky. This was a 12-inch by 12-inch glass negative. He put the negative in there. You get in there, you put the hood over, just like you've seen in the pictures, right? He puts the hood over his head. The image, he's looking right at the glass. It's upside down because of the way a lens works. It flips it upside down. He tells everybody to hold stock still, and then he takes a picture of it and pulls the negative out and covers it up or whatever. And there's thousands of these glass negatives. They're in Ithaca at the Tompkins County Historical Society today. So anyway, this is one of them. This shows the Coggeshall, quote, Coggeshall method. He also got these pictures into all the bee journals at the time. So everybody that subscribed to one or the other of the bee journals knew the Coggshalls. They knew the Coggeshall method. And the Coggeshall method was rough. So they would go in there and they would do everything quickly and not tenderly. They were not gentle beekeepers. And you can tell that because he's got these heavy leather gloves and this basket type, gauntlet. Like he looks like he's a welder. But they had the frame hives, and they did beekeeping pretty much the same way as we do now. One of the things that they had is that in every bee yard, they had gotten away from the idea of having all the bees at the house. Having 500 colonies of bees at your house was convenient for you, but it wasn't that, you were not popular at laundry day when all the clothes were put out on the clotheslines and the bees are pooping everywhere and they had to do the laundry all over again because they got yellow spots all over the laundry. So then they started moving these yards further and further away from the house. And this is a picture of how they got to the apiaries. They had a team of horses. They piled up all their junk. They got the crew to ride a bicycle, and they would go 20 miles, or I think about the farthest they would go would be about 25 miles, because Coggshalls lived in the West Groton, and there's a picture of one of their yards that's right over by Tompkins County Airport. I don't know if I have it up here, but I'll point it out. So this is basically how they extracted. In each one of these yards, they would have a shed, which is still done by some beekeepers. Some beekeepers, if they're smart, or if they're, have a far-flung operation, they'll keep a shed in every yard where you can store equipment. At the very least, you can store extra supers, you can store outfits, you can store stuff. Our club has a shed, which one of our members graciously donated to us. It's about not quite as big as this shed, and it's made out of some kind of heavy, plastic, but it's a quality shed, and we have 20 or 30 bee outfits in there, so if we have a party, everybody can dress up. And we used to keep the honey extractor in there, but anyway, so they would do the honey extracting in the bee yard, in this shed, so that when they left that day with the honey, they weren't taking the supers back to the warehouse to extract. They were taking barrels filled with honey that they'd extracted that day. So it reduced the amount of stuff that was carried back and forth to a minimum. And when you're doing beekeeping with a wagon and horses, I can't even imagine it. Bees and horses. And so you can see the same thing. One of the things I mentioned to the group on Tuesday night was that they commonly just took the honey right out of the extractor and put it into the barrel straight away. There was no straining going on. Anybody that's tried to strain honey knows it's a nightmare if the honey is cold. And unless you can get the honey hot, which most people don't want to do because they want to keep the honey unheated, if you don't get the honey hot, it's not going to go through a fine screen. So what they would do is put it in a barrel, let the barrel sit for 2 or 3 weeks, all the wax and anything that you don't want in there, toothpicks or bee heads or whatever it is that you don't want in there, it all comes to the top. And you can just delicately, carefully take that debris off the top, and the honey is as clear as you would want it to be. It's never been heated. And so this principle is kept alive today. A lot of beekeepers they won't use a wooden barrel, but they'll use a tank big enough to hold 2 or 3 days worth of honey extracting. And then the debris will go to the top over the period of 2 or 3 days or a week, and the honey is drawn out of the bottom where it's clean as a whistle. And you don't get involved in any kind of strainers and all that filtration process, and you don't have to heat it. Now, typically in large-scale beekeeping, they're going to be in an area where it's hot, and they leave the room temperatures hot, and I'm talking like 90s, so the stuff separates pretty fast, if it's hot. It's basically, it comes to the top pretty quickly. And also air bubbles, so the honey is clear. So that's pretty much the history. Do you have any questions about that? The stuff I went over too quickly? Like I said, I probably got 150 shots of just beekeeping in upstate New York. And, it makes a fascinating story for some people. I told my wife I was going to write a book about the history of beekeeping in New York, and she goes, that ought to be interesting about 20 old guys, bald-headed old guys with beards. And I go, hey, wait a minute. So the book's, if I ever write the book, it's going to be called The Golden Age of Beekeeping, and it's going to have color pictures of young people, like that first shot I showed you with the young gal in her garden hives. So, but this is a picture of my bee yard at home. I have scaled back from it. At one point I had 500 colonies in California. And I'll have to confess to you right now, I couldn't make it pay. The honey was wholesaling for 35 cents a pound. I was producing 40,000 pounds of honey. But you do the math. That's not a living, $12,000 a year with a family of 4. And so we tried to up the income by selling bee pollen. And we would harvest approximately 4,000 pounds of bee pollen every summer. So that's 1/10 the amount of volume as the honey. Honey 40,000, bee pollen 4,000. It was worth more than the honey. So we're getting a lot more money for the bee pollen than the honey. But all the same, trying to keep up with the suburban lifestyle and all that stuff, finally in 1990, I just realized I couldn't do it. I just didn't have, I had the idea that if you knew how to do something well, and it was something that you could do almost anywhere, which is beekeeping, that you couldn't miss. Part I left out was I didn't have business savvy. I just didn't know how to do business. So when people come to me now and want to get into the bee business, I say, don't forget, it's a business. And I recommend, and there's an example of that. There's a kid in our club. He started out when he was 13 or 14. Now he's almost ready to graduate from high school. And his mom contacted me. She goes, he wants to quit school and just be a beekeeper. And do you think he can do it? And I said, yeah, he could do it. He's got the build. He's big. He's smart. He was hanging out with the right people in the Carolinas. And I said, but I would try to keep him in school just as long as you possibly can. Tell him to get a business degree, because beekeeping could be here now and not here in 10 years. We don't know, and like I said, I didn't make it pay, but if you have a business degree, you can switch to some other business or make that into a business. I know a lot of people that have a few hives but sell a lot of honey. So they're honey sellers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a friend of mine up in Interlaken, he never has more than about 100 colonies, but he's selling the honey from off of probably 2,000, maybe 3,000 colonies. He buys it straight from these beekeepers at wholesale price. And believe me, he's paying more than 35 cents now. That was the wholesale price in the 80s. The price now for wholesale is well over $2 a pound, but it's nothing like the retail price. So he's taking $2 a pound honey and selling it for $8 to $10 a pound. This is my hives at home. They're settled in for the winter, and pretty much my motto is, put them up in Thanksgiving and don't mess with them until Easter. Because a lot of us are just like busybodies who want to know how they're doing. So I remember one autumn I was checking them around Thanksgiving, and they were already starting to die. And that was one of the most discouraging years I can ever remember. This was, I think, 2016. Everybody's bees were dying off, and it wasn't even winter yet. We lost 80% of our hives, which is 12 times 80%, before Christmas. Nobody knew what was going on. And the so-called experts, we have Cornell experts, we have Albany experts, and there was another faction. There was 3 different theories floating around. The Cornell experts were saying we didn't control mites. I treated for mites, I think at least three times that year. I was on them all summer long. They did not die of mites. The Albany expert, the retired bee inspector, he said, oh, it was pollen. It was a bad year for pollen. You know, they didn't do well because they didn't get enough pollen. Well, I grew up in San Diego. They don't have any pollen from June until January. It's not about the pollen, you know. I mean, and they're not eating pollen in September, October, November anyway. So that didn't make sense to me. And there was a third theory. I don't remember now what it was, but none of them really added up to me. So it was a head, you know, it was a nutcracker. Before I get into the plants, I will say this about that. There was a theory that held water, and when you get mites, you get a whole bunch of viruses, and so it isn't the mites that we're really worried about. You could live with mites. Bees can live with mites. There's regions of the world where colonies have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 mites in the colony, and they don't die. The mites are, you know, annoying. They do you know, suck their hemolymph or their fat bodies or whatever it is they're sucking. But that's not what kills the colonies. What kills the colonies are the viruses. And so that's why we have to control mites, because there's nothing you can do about viruses. It's like ticks. People hate ticks, but we wouldn't be panicking about ticks if it wasn't for the Lyme disease. So, you know, if you could control the Lyme disease, then you could kind of relax a little bit about maybe you got a tick on you, or maybe you got 2 or 3 on your pants. You know, back the way it was back in the day when Lyme disease wasn't prevalent. So it's not the mites, it's the viruses. And what I think happened in 2016, and there's a lot of research that backs this up, is there was 2 strains of viruses that crossbred. And viruses are not very fussy, and they're not very fancy. They don't have sex or anything like that. They just get in there and just mingle. And pretty soon you got varieties of viruses, and some of the varieties won't survive because they mingle a little bit too much. Now they're inbred, and some of them are super viruses, and that's what you see with the flu. You know, every year they got some kind of strain of the flu that beats all the old vaccines. They got to do the new vaccines. So it's a rat race. But still, the bottom line is you have to control mites. If you don't control mites, the colonies are going to tank. So I'm going to get into just the spring, what the spring means to the beekeeper. And so I don't know if you've seen these yet. These usually bloom in February. You know, they're in certain spots. This is a flower, and inside of this thing there's little bits of pollen. And I don't know who the party is for, because there are hardly any bugs out when these things bloom in February. But if you're observant, you might not see bees, but you'll see a lot of flies come out in the early parts of winter when the weather gets warm. A bunch of flies will come out. So I think these probably are pollinated by flies, and to back me up on that is they stink, right? So flies like things that stink. And so one of the ways that flowers get pollinated is to produce odors or substances that are attractive to whatever species are out there. You know, if it's sweet and you got to attract them with sweet, let's do that. If it's smelly, let's do that. So skunk cabbage is pretty much come and gone in most parts. Maple is the next one on the list. You know, if you look at the maple, the buds are already starting to swell. You know, once the maple flower, of course, is the bone of contention for the maple syrup producer. They want to get the sap before the bloom, because something about when they go into bloom. I'm not a maple producer, but they say it makes the syrup taste bad. So you want a big flow before the flowers open. And you know, I always tell people when they're suffering from hay fever early in April and so forth, they go, oh God, it's those dandelions. And I go, no, it's not the dandelions, it's the maples. And they go, maples? Maples have flowers? I never saw them. I say, you're not looking up there, you know, they're up top, they're up high. So this was, when I worked I actually should have told you this. I worked as a New York State bee inspector for 3 seasons. And this was a typical scene that I would find in April. This is a guy had a bee yard about the same size as mine, 12 some odd hives. And he was really into it. He made his own frames. He had a woodworking shop, and he did a perfectly good job making frames as good as factory made. But he was not a very good beekeeper. And so when I got to these hives that spring, about 95% of them were dead. I shouldn't have said that. It's not his fault. Stuff happens, okay? He was not a lucky beekeeper. I like to put it down to luck. There's skill and there's luck, and you need both. So he wasn't lucky. This is a colony that's died over winter, and a lot of times these things have honey in them. It isn't that they starved. And we were talking about that before the crowd showed up. A lot of times they have honey, but it's so cold that they eat up all the honey where they are, and there might be honey on these frames here and honey on these frames here, but they're too cold to move. So it's like you're so cold in your tent and the honey's in another tent, and you're not going out there. So they can starve even with honey in the hive. The other thing is that sometimes the critical mass, the bees die off. So the rate at which bees die off, a lot of that does depend upon the honey or pollen that they eat in the summer. So as they're eating pollen in the summer, in September and October, they're storing that food value in their bodies as fat. So they accumulate that value as in these fat bodies, which is not strictly speaking fat, but it's a complex arrangement of nutritional products. So suppose you didn't get enough pollen that summer, which is what the Albany guy was saying, then you didn't produce that fat body. Then by the time November rolled around, maybe you consumed all of that, and maybe then you died. So that could be what happened here. The other thing that could happen is that these bees had a shortened lifespan for one reason or another. Probably viruses shortened their lifespan, and they couldn't live long enough. Because typically a honeybee in a season lives for 4 or 6 weeks. And that's not going to get you through winter. So the winter bees they're raised in the fall, they have to live from 4 to 6 months. So they're physiologically a different bee. It's almost as like they're another caste. The summer bees, the winter bees, they're just physiologically different. They have to have a much longer lifespan, or they're not going to make it all the way till April. So I think that happens to a lot of colonies where they looked great in the fall, and about this time, they're down to a handful of bees, and they can't keep that cluster warm. No matter how much honey there is, you got to have a critical mass. It's got to be at least the size of a football, and better still, a basketball-sized cluster. And that's when the weather's very cold and they're sucked together tight like that. When the weather warms up, they expand, and you think, wow, I got a hive full of bees. But it's basically just they spread themselves out. When you go into the hives in September, October, after it's gotten settled in cold, that's when you can see how big they are. And if they're sucked down to a size smaller than a football, they're probably not going to be able to make it, because through attrition, they're going to get smaller and smaller. Here's the cluster here, and you can see if you look really closely, this is honey over here. So, they've starved over here. So why they didn't, and this is pollen actually here. So it wasn't that they didn't have pollen, and it wasn't that they didn't have honey. It's that there weren't enough of them to warm the little cluster up to move over there. Or maybe they just gave up, they're animals. It could be that they just gave up and didn't make it. So this is the exact opposite. This is a friend of mine that lives in Madison County, Mike Johnson. He sells bees in the spring. He's successful enough that when spring comes around, everybody else's bees are dead. He's selling bees to them. So this is a picture of my friend Mike and I. We both learned beekeeping in upstate New York, but we didn't meet until both of us were working for a bee breeder in California. What are the odds? We were talking one afternoon. I was talking about this beekeeper I'd worked for in upstate New York, and he had these 2-ton trucks, and they're all painted green, and they held 32 colonies and stake sides. This is really old school in that time. And he goes, "Did you work for Larry Winter?" "Oh my God, that's the same beekeeper I worked for." And it's like we worked 2 different summers, so we never met each other until and here it is, like 30 years later. I go out to visit him one day, and we're wearing the same clothes. What are the odds of that? The only difference is he's got one of these veils with a hard hat, and I don't like it because I don't have any hair on top. He's got hair on top. The hard hat feels, like a canvas hat on top. Hard plastic hat with that band in there. Oh, no. So he's got bees in the spring, and what he does when you buy bees from him, this is the funniest thing. Normally when you buy bees from somebody, they got them all ready for you. They're like in packages, like in a box. You buy a Nuc box or you buy a package. They're all ready. You just show up. You put them in your car or your truck. God, I help you if you put them on the back seat. But whatever, away you go. When you go there, he expects you to bring the boxes, and one at a time, he goes through the frames and selects the frames. Here's a good one. No, I don't want to give you that one. Oh, there's the queen. There's for you. And it's like, oh my God, Mike, when are you going to step up your game? But anyway, so suppose you don't have good bees in the spring. Just, you're the buying bees from Mike, not the selling bees to you. This is one of the ways that you can start up a new colony. This is a package bees. Can everybody see that okay? So how many people have hive packages? Put package bees in. It's super easy. The bees come in a cage. Picture of the cage there. Hive is ready to go. Person's got 10 frame hive. They pulled some frames out of the middle there. I generally pull the frames out of the side. Your hive, if you have them, if your hives died over winter and they didn't starve, then you're going to have frames of honey. So if you have frames of honey, that's what you're going to want in here. You're going to want frames of honey. And this picture over here, the person is spritzing the bees with a very light sugar syrup. It should be warm and very not too sticky, just a little bit sticky. So when you spritz the bees with sugar syrup like that, number one, it keeps them from flying when you open up the package because they got syrup on their wings. Number two, they'll start licking it off each other, and eating the syrup puts them in a good mood. That sugar rush puts the bees in a good mood. And so that's what you want, bees in a good mood, not trying to fly. So that's the reason. You don't want to soak them so badly that they all glom together. So then here's a picture. This person is taking the can out of there. When they're shipped, they come with a can of sugar syrup. And over the years, the syrup's gotten thicker and thicker. Now it's almost as thick as honey. And that way, the shipper knows that they're not going to run out. Okay, so if the bees are dead when they get to the other end, he knows they didn't run out of syrup because that syrup is enough syrup in there to last a month of Sundays. But they used to have it thin because they were too cheap to put in, the more sugar you put in there, the more it's going to cost you. So thin syrup is cheaper than thick syrup. But the losses that they got from the syrup running out, and especially from getting shaken out on the trucks, it would shake out like that, and there'd be no syrup in there. So they decided, well, we're going to just buy more expensive syrup, and that way we know they won't run out, and it won't dribble all over the bees and drown. So there shouldn't be more than about an inch or two of dead bees in the bottom, and usually the shipper guarantees that there won't be, and then if there's like 4 or 5 inches of dead bees in the bottom, then you try to get them to replace it or file an insurance claim. Takes the can out. This here is a picture of the beekeeper pulling the cage out. The queen is in a separate cage, and the reason they do that is twofold. One, that protects the queen from any harm that might happen to her in the shipping. So she's protected in there. The other reason they do that is because this queen and those bees probably didn't come from the same hive. Okay, because the queens are raised in some hives that are designed for queen raising, and the bees are raised in hives that are designed for raising bulk bees. And normally when they make these packages, they take the bees out of 200-300 hives during the day and put them all together in this huge bulk box, and then they measure out your 3 pounds, and you get 3 pounds of bees and a queen from some other hive. So this picture here is the person shaking the bees through the hole down into the hive. Now, people ask me all the time, isn't there some way that you can do it without shaking the bees? You go, I don't want to shake the bees. It's going to hurt them. And I say to them, those bees were shaken out of the hives into a bulk box. Then they were shaken from the bulk box into the cage. One more shake, it's not going to hurt them, okay? They can handle it. Otherwise, they wouldn't still be alive after all this. But, I mean, if you wanted to, you could set the whole cage in there. I think that it's the size it is so that you can put the whole cage in there and let them crawl out on their own. The problem is sometimes they don't come out. They'll stay in there. They've been in there for a week maybe, and they won't come out. And you put the queen on the frames, and the bees are in the cage, and the queen dies, and the whole thing goes south. You don't want that. Shake them out. So then the next stage is, where are we? Yeah, shaking bees, spritzing the queen. I don't know why he's doing that. I would never spritz the queen. Oh, that's because he's going to open her. He's opening her up. He's spritzing the queen and opening it up and letting them run loose. You can do this because they've been together for a couple of days or a week. They probably are accustomed to each other. They'll accept her as their queen because they've been with her for a while already. And that's the only queen they get. I normally don't do this. Normally the cage comes with a sugar plug, and I just let the bees chew the sugar plug out. Maybe it takes an extra day or so, but it makes me feel like I'm not taking as much risk. It's a toss-up. Is it riskier to leave them in plugged in for a day or two, or is it riskier to let them out? I don't know. So after they go in there, they kind of go down and come up the sides and up the frames, and you can put the rest of the frames back in. It's a huge mistake to not put the rest of the frames back in because you think, oh, I'll be back right away to put the rest of the frames in. And I've got a picture coming up that'll show you what happens when you don't put the rest of the frames back in. So suppose your bees did make it and you wanted to sell bees to me or to Pat, or I don't know your name. Elizabeth. We're going to sell bees to Elizabeth. So this guy here, this is a friend of mine who lives in Chile. He sent me these pictures. And he went from having a few hundred hives, I don't know, about 5 or 10 years ago. Now he's managing them by the tens of thousands. The guy just took off like a rocket ship, you know. You can never figure it out. Some people you think, oh, they'll do okay with the bees. Some people you think, oh, they're never going to do anything with the bees. And I'm always proved wrong. It's the people that I thought, you know, they're not going to do that much. They take it off and run with it. And the people that, you know, have all the, especially ones that talk a lot, you know, those are the people who are never going to do nothing. Anyway, so this guy, he goes through the hives in springtime, finds the queen, if you can find her. You want to find the queen. If you're making splits, you want to find the queen so that you don't take her off unless your goal is to sell the queen, which is what Mike Johnson does. He sells the queen and a couple of frames of bees, but that queen's from the year before. So that's the caveat. You know, usually when you buy bees, you want the queen from that same year. So he's got this all set up. So the secret to beekeeping is being prepared. If you go out there and you don't have everything you need, it's going to take you 10 times longer to do everything that you want to do. This guy's got everything prepared. He's got the hives that he's going to rob from Peter and make Paul here. So these are nuke boxes. These hold four or five frames, and you can take the brood and the bees, steal them out of the good hives, the hives that you still have alive, and you can set up these nuke boxes. Nuke is short for nucleus. Basically it's a minimum amount of bees that you need to start a new colony. And you can argue all day long what the actual minimum is, but the standard is this has got a 5-frame. This is a standard. Chuck Cudick sells nukes 5-frame standard. There's a guy upstart coming out of Chemung area. I'm not going to get too specific because then you'll know who he is. And he sells 4 frames. And a lot of times there's only 2 frames that have bees on them. So it's not really, I don't call that a 4-frame. I call that a 2-frame with 2 more frames to make you think you got a 4-frame. I'm sorry, it's not, you know, it's like you buy a car, but it's got those flat tire wheels on it or something. Hello, you got a little bit of expense coming in. But anyway, so here, one of the myths that people have about bees is that if you make a nuke and you force them to raise their own queen, that's not a good idea. It's a perfectly good idea. People did that for centuries. You just put some bees in a box and they will raise a queen. The downside of it is it takes a little while. Okay, so if you make a nuke and you already have a queen, which maybe you paid for, and put that in there, she's good to go within a day or two. Whereas if you put the bees in there like that, and they have to raise their own, this process could take up to 3 weeks because they've got to raise her, which takes 10 days. She's got to hatch and kind of, you know, mosey around the hive for a few days just to see, you know, get a sense of who she is. And then she's got to fly off to mate, and they'll mate on several different days if the weather's good. And there's an odd, won't say it's 50-50, but it's not 100% chance that she's going to make it back. So in sometimes when the weather's bad, it could be as low as 50-50. So people that raise queens for a living, they try to raise twice as many as they've committed for. the rule is if you don't have enough, then you have to raise twice as many, because you can be subjected to 50% losses. And if you raise twice as many, you're still good to go. But typically, it's more like 80% will make it back, 20%, maybe they fly off and don't come back, or they come back, but they're not properly mated, or there's something the matter with that queen, like physically she couldn't mate, or maybe she didn't have all 4 wings, you know. Stuff happens that's untoward. So that's why, people are discouraged from doing it this way. But what he's done is he's probably going to put a queen cell in there. So a queen cell is intermediate between those 2 plans. One is to force the bees to raise their own queen. 2 is to buy a queen for 20, 30 bucks. 3 is a queen cell where you raise the queens yourself. And you've got 10 days head start on them now, because that queen is ready to hatch. She's already 10 days old when you put her in there. So then she's just got a couple of days to get ready to mate, and then a few days to mate. So that's probably what he's doing. Knowing my friend Juanse, that's probably what he's doing. He's raising. Here's the picture I told you about, where if you didn't come back in time. So this is, you got a nice crop of honey the old school way, right? Get out your broad knife and a bucket and start cutting away, you know. And it's good honey, believe me. Every year I cut some honey out just fresh like that, and it's the best honey you'll ever have, because it's not been run through a honey extractor. But don't get me wrong, honey extractor doesn't hurt the honey, but it does incorporate some air in it, and it does you probably lose some of the essence, you know. It's like apple right off the tree versus, you know, sliced up and sat on the kitchen counter all evening, but whatever. It's a taste. So this is one of the first spring flowers. You know, when I first saw that, I thought mustard, because California in the spring, that's one of the first things that happens is mustard blooms up and down the coast. And it's true mustard. It's a yellow mustard, Brassica species. Almost all the Brassica species are good honey producers. They produce a very light nectar. It comes on fast, and it's attractive to the bees. And they also get pollen from the Brassicas. This is called yellow rocket, so it's not strictly speaking a mustard, but it's close enough for my taste. Right soon after that, you know, your apples. This is going to be an abbreviated set of the plants. This is what's funny, is if you write a book about the honey plants, most regions you'll have like 2 or 3. It's not much of a book, right? So usually they include all the ones that, you know, also produce honey, or sometimes produce honey, or somebody said they produced honey that one time but never did again. So I got a book on bee plants of Utah, and the first 3/4 of it are all these great pictures of the ones that are probably produce honey. And then in the back there's an appendix that are like maybe, but probably not. I don't know why you just even included it, right? Because it goes on for another 10 pages of all these plants that have like question marks. But he wanted to be thorough, you know. If somebody said they got honey from it sometime, that means that maybe if there was enough of it, it would be a good thing. Like a perfect example is heartsease. Anybody know what heartsease is? Smartweed, heartsease, pepperweed. It grows along the Susquehanna, in the flood areas there. It comes up late in the summer. It's very closely related to buckwheat. So right away that tells you buckwheat family. Almost all the flowers in the buckwheat family are honey producers, but there's just not enough of it. But for example, if you had bees down on Susquehanna, and the conditions were just right, and there was this stuff growing up and down the Susquehanna for 4 or 5 miles, you might get 10 gallons per hive of smartweed, and nobody would know what it was. You know, I got smartweed, heartsease. I like the name heartsease. Apple is one of those things that pretty much is lost. If you put your bees in the apples, usually they want 2 or 3 colonies per acre or something like that. Too many hives to really produce for the beekeeper. What the beekeeper is doing is producing for the apple grower. He wants a pollination set. He wants every possible flower pollinated. So they tend to overstock the orchards with bees at the rate of about 2 per acre or more if they bucks up, because it's like, you know, it's like crop insurance. They don't know if they need those bees. You know, there's the people at Cornell now are telling everybody, oh, the wild bees would do this. You don't need to rent honeybees. Wild bees could pollinate. Who do you think pollinated the apples before the settlers came here? There was apples here. There was bees here. They weren't beehives. They were wild bees. But the problem with that whole scenario is, A, with our upstate area being fairly suburbanized, are there enough wild bees left? B, are they going to hatch out of the ground at the right time? These things hibernate in the ground. You know, a lot of these wild bees hibernate in the ground, and if it's the spring is late, maybe they don't come out at the right time. Or if the spring is early, maybe they come out too early and their whole life cycle is over before the apples bloom. So that's why most apple growers will hire in bees, whether they think they need them or not. The dad did that and granddaddy did that, so I'm going to do it because in the big picture, that's not a big expense. They're going to spend a hell of a lot more on other things like fertilizer and whatnot, pruning, labor, the price of to have a hive of bees in there for 2 weeks, and plus the fact that way they can control when those bees are there. If they own bees, that means the bees are going to be a nuisance all 50 weeks out of the year just to do pollination 2 weeks out of the year. So they like the idea. Guy brings bees in, pollinates, you phone them up and say, we get the bees out of here. We're done with them. And so swarming, that's the other way of getting bees. How many people have caught a swarm? Oh yeah, this is one of the most exciting things. This is one of the things that gets people interested in bees for the rest of their life. You catch a swarm. This hive is preparing, what we call preparing to swarm. They're all hanging out there. It's pretty, the signs here are pretty obvious. You know, this hive is getting ready to swarm. It's not usually that obvious, okay? Usually they're still inside there, especially if you've been adding supers, which is what you want to do. They're all in there and they're thinking about swarming, but you don't know that by looking at them. You can't look at preparing to swarm. You won't know that. There's a picture of a swarm on a stump. This was in one of Tom Seeley's yards, and he said, oh yeah, every year they seem to always light on that stump. There's something about that stump that as soon as the swarm comes out, they go right to that stump. The one on the right hand was not quite so bright. They picked this branch, which was practically hanging over the road, and one of my neighbors called and she goes, did you see that swarm over in Sandbank Road? I said, no. She goes, well, you better go quick because it won't be there forever. And that's how you get swarms. Somebody's seen one, you know. Somebody phones you up. And I told the other group on Tuesday night, I said, for God's sakes, if you've never been out on a swarm call before, 2 things. Don't go far. Don't go more than 10 or 15 minutes because there's a very strong possibility that they won't be there when you get there because they're in transit. So, you know, here they are. Whoever's called you, he or she is panicking because there's bees in the yard and there never have been before. And the dog's going to get stung. And you get over there, they're gone. They've gone. Or they've gone up in some 25-foot tree or something like that. The other thing is, everybody's got phones now, everybody's got cameras now, get them to take a picture of it. Because I don't know how many times I've gone and they weren't bees. They were not bees. I said, do you know if they're bees? Are you sure they're bees? Oh yeah, you think I don't know what bees look like? I know bees. I said, they could be hornets. I'm sorry, I just have to. They're not hornets. I know hornets. They're not hornets. They're hornets. So half the time they're hornets. So I try to get a picture now. And one or few times that I just forgot to do that, I regretted it because they weren't bees. But most of the time I don't go. This guy is so happy. He's got himself, you can see his grin. He's got himself a big fat swarm. And so it's a time of enjoyment. If you can get past the fact that, oh, my bees swarm, that means probably they're going to be messed up for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Because what they do is they take most of the bees, and they take the queen, and they leave you with this, you know, fixer-upper, where they've got to raise a new queen, they've got to repopulate the hive. The one thing that they will have is plenty to eat, so you don't need to worry about that. Here's one that's up high. This friend of mine called. She goes, one of my hives swarmed. Can we catch it? And I go, what do you mean, can we catch it? She goes, well, it is up pretty high. And I said, how high? What are you talking about? She goes, well, we got this really, really tall ladder. And I said, I don't like the sound of that. You know, I don't want to go up a really, really tall ladder. You go up the really, really tall ladder. That's her up there. So finally, I could see how excited she was about doing this. We have to do this, right? I said, all right, I'll do it under one circumstance. You go up there first, and you take the camera, and you take pictures of me catching the swarm. So I can tell my friends. I went up a 25-foot ladder, or however it was. But anyway, so I carried a hive up there. When I catch a swarm, I usually have a hive. And that consists of an old box, smells of bees, old frames, ones I don't even really want anymore, smell really strongly of bees. And I went up there and I shook the bees into it pretty much. You can't get every last bee, especially up on the ladder, especially if they're all tangled up in the branches. So you try to get 80 or 90% of them, hoping that you get the queen, and hoping that they'll get the picture, and that if you miss the queen, she'll go to be with the bees. Everybody will go in the hive. And that's what's happening here. They're all going in. This was the branch. We brought the branch just as crop insurance here. So they smell the bees on the branch, and then they smell the bees in the hive. And how do I know that? Because this is a behavior that they have, which is called fanning. On their rear end, they have these glands. So when they open up those glands on their rear end, and then they fan their wings, and it gives off this odor. It's called an orientation odor. The bees have about half a dozen or more very strong odors, or maybe not so strong, but strong chemicals. And this is the orientation odor. It smells a lot like, if you've ever smelled lemongrass, and a lot of people use lemongrass oil. When they're collecting swarms, they'll put lemongrass oil in there because they think, well, bees smell that. That's a familiar smell for them. Another smell that you will smell around bees is their alarm odor. That's a danger sign, and it smells like banana. You've smelled that. It smells like amyl acetate. It's a strong kind of sharp odor, and that if they smell that, what their little brain says, go there and sting that. Whatever it is, if it's moving, sting it. So that's why you don't want to get that on yourself. So when you see people trying to get the stings off, once the sting has hit your hand, you're stung. You got all the venom. People say, oh, you got to get that off right away because it's still pumping. The first jab, most of it's in there. You've lost that. But you do want to get it off there because it reeks of that amyl acetate. That gland is filled with venom and amyl acetate. And you go like this, and the bees are going like this. That's how they work. They sting a bear on the nose, right? And the bear's going, "Arr!" And they're all trying to sting that spot because that smells like amyl acetate. So how much time do we have?
About 15 minutes.
Okay, so we'll get into this. This is the last of the spring talk. So now we've talked about swarming, and you're saying, I don't want my bees to swarm. I don't want them to head for the hills, because you know what's going to happen? They're going to swarm, I'm going to be at work, and I'm never going to know about it. I'm going to come back the next time I look at them, and the bees are going to be gone, and the queen is gone, and then what do I do? So mainly, the way to prevent swarming is to have lots of old comb, which most of us as beginners, we don't have that. Okay, so when I tell people that, they go, well, that's not any help. Why are you telling me that? I don't have that. And won't new comb work? I go, well, that's what you'll have to use, but it does not have the same effect. If you put supers on, like this is your hive, 1, 2, and you're adding the third. So the reason it says 1, 2 is because when you come to the hive in the springtime, 1 will be at the bottom, 2 will be at the top. And one of the first things beekeepers do in the springtime is reverse them, because number 1 will be empty. Typically in the spring, number 1 will be empty, and the bees will all be living in number 2, and you reverse them. And basically what you've done is you've added your first super using the equipment that was already there. So if number 1 is empty, and you put it on top, now you got the bees, the hive, the queen, the action is in the bottom, and they can move up to number 1. That's number 2. Anyway, you get the picture. Yeah, move up to number 1, which is now number 2. And then if you have another super, you can put that on too. And these are empty, and so the bees will move up into them to clean them or store a little bit of honey in them or whatever. But what it does is it reduces the congestion. If you just left them in one box the whole season, they'll fill that up. They're full. They're done. They're going to swarm. So if you can keep their mind off of that by getting them up into the supers, that's the number 1 way of preventing swarming. But that is not something automatic, and it's not something everyone will be able to take advantage of, because if you don't have piles and piles of old comb, you don't have it. So then, this picture is not what I'm about to talk about. This picture is about adding more supers. What I'm going to talk about now is how to split the hive. So you decided you're going to split the hive. So the best and surest way to keep a hive from swarming is to do it before they do. So swarming is doing what? Swarming is splitting the hive. They send off a swarm, they've made a new hive, they've made an old hive, or vice versa. I usually consider the swarm as the old hive, and the new hive is the one that's left behind, because they're the ones that get the new queen. But whatever, okay? So splitting a hive is the surest and quickest way to slow them way back so that they don't swarm in May. And somebody asked, when do the swarms usually come out? In this area, they usually come out throughout May, but there's a peak in the middle of May. And it depends upon the weather. It's not one of those things like, oh yeah, look, it's May 15th. I better get my swarm box ready to go. It's not like that. But anyway, so to make a long story short, this hive at this time has honey, brood, maybe even honey and brood in the second one, and they're starting to work in the third one. What you do is you have a queen excluder, and everybody know what a queen excluder is? If you don't know what it is, I won't embarrass you. It's a grid that the bees can go through like no problem, but the queen can't fit because she's got a little bit wider abdomen. Try to get through there, but can't. So what you do here is you take the frames that you want to steal. 4 frames of brood and honey, 5 if you're feeling generous. Remove all the bees from them, shake them in front so they can travel back in, and put them in one of these boxes above the queen excluder. So what have you got? You've got the queen and the hive below the queen excluder, and you've got 4 or 5 frames of brood and honey above the excluder, but no bees. You have to remember that part. There's no bees. So then you wait 24 hours, you come back, and the whole thing is covered with bees. So this is good to go. You can take this, make your nuke out of it. You haven't had to look for the queen because that's a big stumbling block for anybody. You know, even I have had times when I was totally stumped and could not find the queen in a hive. So it's not like, and for beginners, it's especially difficult because the more you get the hive taken apart, the less likely you're ever going to be to find it. So this splits the hive, queen and brood, no queen, bees. And it takes about 24 hours. They go up there to take care of the bees, or brood, excuse me. And then you can put that in your nuke box and haul it away. Best plan is to haul it away because some of the bees will try to fly back. If you don't haul it away, the best plan is to then take and move what we call the parent hive. This is the parent hive. This is the offspring. Move the parent hive over about 10 or 15 feet. Put this one in place. So what you end up with is the queen and most of the bees are over there. The brood and not so many bees are here. All the bees flying back will go in there and they'll about even it out. It's about even Steven because the queen is going to hold the bees, the one that gets moved. The hardest thing to do is to get the bees to stay. If you move them over here, they're going to want to go back over there. At least the ones that have flown before. If you move the hive, they're going to want to fly back. So that's to your advantage in this case because it'll about even them out, 50-50. The hive that gets moved has the queen and the bulk of the bees and the bulk of the brood. The hive that doesn't get moved gets all the flying bees, all the bees that know how to fly. And that could be as many as 3/4 or it could be as few as 1/3. Depends upon how young the bees are. If they're all young bees and never flew before, they're going to stay wherever you put them. So it's either move them under that circumstance or take the new colonies to somewhere else where they've never flown before, and they'll just be fine with that. So this whole process here was another lecture, but I just threw it in there because I didn't have any pictures that I could point to. So then, as season goes on, we run into things like the rose, multiflora rose, the flower that everyone loves to hate, right? I'm sure everybody's had this in places where they didn't want them. I love this plant. When I moved to upstate New York in 1991 from California, I thought, a place where you got wild roses blooming everywhere you go, what's wrong with that? And then I found out that everyone hates them because they're invasive. No, they don't produce honey. This bee is on this flower to get pollen, and you can see the pollen on the bee's leg. So it's a very good pollen plant. And I have to tell you that about probably 2/3 of the best honey and pollen plants in this region, and maybe a lot of other regions, are invasive. I apologize. The reason why they're invasive is because they're very, very good at what they do. And one of the things that they do is to produce nectar and pollen. And honeybee is not native. And us white folk are not native. So we're all in this boat together. So I support non-natives the same as natives. And clover, non-native, best honey plant in the world, but there's just not very much of it around anymore because, in fact, I always wondered, why is there not a clover around? There's still dairies, and I asked this dairy farmer, and he goes, clover, if you try to make silage out of it, it just turns to mush. We make the silage out of corn now, So that's that. We lost out on that one. So beekeeping tends to be an opportunistic enterprise. People often ask, what could I plant to help the bees? Well, you can plant stuff to help the bees, but probably not going to have any effect on your particular hive because, and then one guy goes, come on now, just tell me. Just tell me. I said, 100 acres of buckwheat, okay? 100 acres? I go, yeah, you don't have 100 acres, the hive's not going to be interested. They want big patches of stuff, big patches of clover, like that. Big patches of buckwheat, big patches of basswood. Basswood is a native tree. You all know basswood. It's called linden, American linden, European linden. Basswood is the best honey plant there is. I guess we don't have time for removing honey, but this was supposed to be leading up to spring, right? We'll come back and talk about removing honey when you got some. Yeah, I was just going to go through that, but do you have questions? Or did I cover everything?
How early do you split?
How early do I split? I'm splitting at 3 o'clock. No. That's a good question. It's the same answer as about swarming. You know, it depends. But if the bees are swarming, they think it's the best time of the year to split, right? So that's pretty much, I go by the calendar. I figure, you know, stay 2 weeks ahead of them. So if you're going through your hives regularly, you may see what are called queen cups forming at the bottom of the frames. These cups are not, this does not mean they're about to swarm. People go, oh my God, they're about to swarm. They're making queen cups. Queen cup is like a cup of wine with no wine. You don't got wine. You just got the cup, okay? Just got the cup. That means that they could make a queen cell if they decide to, but it does not mean that they've decided to do that. It's just like the cups are out, but nobody's got the wine. So the next step is the queen puts an egg in there. And again, that doesn't mean that hive is going to swarm, but it's starting to look like it, right? So the actual research that's been done on swarming has shown that about half or better than half the time, they will make cups, eggs, queen cells, the whole ball of wax, and then not swarm. Why? Nobody knows. But you're going to just assume that if you see queen cells, they're going to swarm because, you know, they're not. So either split them before they make the queen cells, or when the first time you see a capped queen cell, you go, oh my God, capped queen cells. I can make splits. I can make bunches of them because I got all these free queens. And you can make from one colony, if you do it correctly, and that's the caveat, right? Doing it correctly. You could make 10. I've seen it done many, many times. But the trick is, if you make those splits, you make those nukes, you got to take them somewhere else because otherwise they're just going to fly right back in. It's not going to work. But I've seen people take a whole truckload of bees to another spot and then just split them all up, 10 from one, 10 from one, 10 from one, and all of a sudden they've got 10 times as many hives. But those are experts. So for you, I would recommend, not you personally, but y'all, I would recommend going conservatively. But the very easiest thing to do is to take the hive, set it off, take the hive that was standing there, move it 10 feet like I talked about, and then put the other one back. So the idea there is that you probably want to get the queen in the hive that gets moved if you're going to do it the cut and run way. It's called walk-away splits. You just split the hive and walk away. You're not, you know, it's like, but that works, especially if you don't have any time or you don't have any expertise, or you couldn't do worse. Split the hive. You get in 4 weeks, you got 2 colonies, and they didn't swarm. That's the whole thing. But worst case scenario is one of those 2 splits fails to raise a queen, and you just put them back together again. At least it didn't swarm. And so you're right back where you started, but not really because you prevented the swarming. So in other words, bees normally swarm in May, so you want to normally do your splitting or purchasing your packaged bees or whatever it is that you're doing to repopulate your hives. We're doing it in April or the early May. People are buying. Pat told me she picked up packages already this year, first week of April. One of the disadvantages of doing it too early is that then the weather turns crappy and the bees suffer. So I'm getting my packages the last week of April just because I figure the odds of the weather being better are slightly improved. I've seen some pretty bad Mays also. You know, and the worse the weather, the more is that you may have to feed them and do all kinds of things. And it's really hard to feed bees in cold weather because they can hardly move. How are they going to get to the feeder? They're like, so if you make splits really super early, you want to put frames of honey in there if you have them. So there's a lot of good reasons to wait till the second week of May, and then odds are that there's tons of stuff in bloom, or at least enough. And odds are the weather's warm enough, so if you have to feed them, they can at least move around, get to the feeder. And feeders run all the way from a jar, you know, sitting on top of a hole in the top of the hive, to I don't know why it took me so long. Last spring was the first time I used a bulk feeder. I took a 5-gallon pail, cut some holes in the side, put about 30 wine corks in there, and then filled it up with 5 gallons of sugar syrup. And the bees just go through the holes and drink the syrup out. They don't drown because of all the wine corks floating in there. And the lid is on there to keep the weather and large animals from going in there. So, but I know commercial beekeepers that do the same thing with a 5-gallon feeder. They just fill it with 55 gallons of sugar syrup or corn syrup. They're cheap bastards. And throw a bunch of hay in there so they don't drown in it. If they take it fast, there's not time for them to drown anyway. If they take it in 24 hours, which sometimes they will, you wouldn't believe it. They just go, there's not time in there for them to drown, or at least not very many. Questions? This was the honey. You've seen honey before. Knapweed. These were the last. This is the last hurrah of Japanese knotweed. That's turned into a huge honey plant in my area. I don't know about Pat. Do you get knotweed? And I live in Danby Township, which is just south of Ithaca, and almost everybody has it. It's a huge plant. And goldenrod and aster, and that's about it. It's over. So that's all I was going to just talk a little bit about. Thank you. It's supposed to be fun. Just remember that. It's still fun for me. You know, if it wasn't fun for me, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't come here. And I'd be, you know, I don't want to see people get involved in something that's not going to work out for them. Thank you.